Matt Langley is a procurement and sustainability leader who has embedded sustainability into more than 25 years of procurement practice. He's led global centres of excellence across sourcing, category management, analytics, and supply management. At CBRE, the largest real estate company globally, Matt led procurement operations, technology transformation, data, risk, and ESG. At CBRE, he built a first of its kind net zero supply chain program and product. Matt is the 2024 European CIPS Sustainable Procurement Champion, a regular guest speaker and judge at CIPS events, a former Sustainable Procurement Pledge Scope 3 co-chair, and current Emerging Tech co-chair. He has advised Green Project Technology and EmitWise, a carbon accounting and supply chain decarbonising startup, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Matt is also the author of two books on these topics, Sustainable Procurement in Action and Circular Procurement in Action, that he wrote with his colleague Helene Carpenter. Matt is currently employed at Sunrise. Matt, welcome to our discussion on governance.
So it was interesting for me that governance was not something I really started with. In the way that I didn't have the senior leadership buy-in when I was at CBRE. And you talk to a number of the other leading companies like Unilever and Mars and Schneider Electric. They had really heavy CEO support to be able to drive into the sustainability area. I didn't at CBRE. I had some support from the Chief Procurement Officer, but I was able, as I developed the operations, the technology, the risk roadmap, I quietly built a number of ESG aspects into those roadmaps. And after a couple of years, CBRE caught up and then made a net zero commitment. And then I was able to look to leverage what I'd been doing together and kind of work through. And so interestingly, at one stage, I had my boss, the CPO, and sure Andrea won't mind me saying this, say to me, Matt, stop working on ESG, no one cares. I didn't really listen. He was based in Dallas at the time, and he's written the foreword for the book. Obviously, he changed his mind. But yeah, I had some pushback internally from senior leaders who didn't see that clients were asking for this. And I'm like, just wait, it'll take a couple of years for us to build this program, but they will start asking and want to do that. And so I quietly built it into the program. And so when you're really thinking through your supply or sustainable procurement program, you need to think through the whole operating model. You need to look to tweak all the different aspects. And so a lot of companies start with a policy. And so that's where you need senior leadership buy-in. But most organizations have a supplier code of conduct. And that was where I started at CBRE. I looked to add in a clause around ESG that they didn't have previously. And so that starts at least the conversation needing to happen when you look to engage with a new supplier, and they can kind of see, okay, well, this is starting to be important. In your category strategies, you need to work with your category managers to be able to engage. And there'll be some that will be for this and some that will be less for it. And so you kind of need to find those ones that are engaged and work with them and provide them with the tools and support that they need. But because you don't want your suppliers or really your category managers to need to become experts in decarbonising supply chains. You need to give them the tools. And that's really data that's helping them engage with the suppliers, that's decarbonising databases, that's renewable energy solutions that they can push through their supply chain, that's the carbon accounting and the reporting so you can track improvements. Those things really need to be built out to be able to provide to the category managers. So it makes it a lot easier for them to do. helpfully AI is helping in a lot of those areas. And then you've got sourcing and RFXs, and there's some interesting thinking that's come around internal carbon prices that you can look to leverage, ICPs, and also if you're like a Hellion and what Chris Lowe has done and helped drive globally through the Sustainable Procurement Pledge is requiring that suppliers provide a carbon product footprint, a PCF, that effectively calculates what your carbon emissions are for that product you're buying, and then use like an internal carbon price or 100 euros as an example, with the cost, and you multiply those, or the cost plus the PCF carbon emissions times 100 euros, then works out what the overall commercial cost is for that product that you're buying. So you can start bringing it in there. So a lot of companies, and me to start with, had like 20% allocated to sustainability, but then you had 50 to 60% allocated to the cost of the product or service that you're buying. So it really didn't move the needle. It did a little bit, but it was sort of around the edges. The other approach that I was looking at is requiring that any supplier that was invited to the RFP had to be a sustainable supplier, and that could be defined as like a EcoVadis badged supplier or some sort of other aspect. But yeah, the sourcing is really an important key one to hit hard, because that's when decisions are made for the next 3 to 5 years of bringing a supplier in and then getting them on the right track. Contracts is important. You can add contract clauses. I haven't seen that really moves the needle, but the supplier management does, and you can loop back or kind of say, look, you put it in your contract that this was important, that you provided me carbon reporting, or that you provided me commitments to net zero that aligned with my company or my requirements. And so you can start having that supplier management coming through. And then being a huge Peter Drucker fan, what gets measured gets managed. And so, the reporting and insurance is key to making all of this work. So yeah, you need to hit all different aspects of the procurement operating model to really see those improvements add to each other and the synergies start coming through. So you can, the other aspect with governance is just how wide this starts to be very quickly. So interestingly, the Scope 3 peer group that was set up by Ollie Hurry a few years ago was set up for sustainability people to be able to talk to procurement people, because they didn't speak the same language. And so that group is now a few thousand people and is half procurement and half sustainability. But in procurement, we know that we have to speak different languages when we talk to different parts of the business. And so sustainability is really looking at, from a project management perspective, how do I reduce my carbon emissions or improve my sustainability? And they come to procurement and ask those. And what we need to be thinking when they're saying, while you need to reduce your carbon emissions, we need to be thinking, okay, that's great. Well, but I need a baseline, just like a spend baseline. I need a carbon baseline. And from that carbon baseline, I then need the actual or primary emissions from the suppliers to really have that accurate. And the more I get that, the more accurate it becomes, and the more I can go back to the sustainability team and help them with their reporting, kind of show that. But it's not just a data journey. This is also a supplier engagement journey, and I need to provide the tools to the suppliers to be able to do it. And just having discussions with suppliers is not going to really move the needle. But you also need to talk with your business colleagues and work through. Sometimes there is an additional cost, not always. Actually, not often there's an additional cost, but there is a re-engineering cost, or there's a different requirements that you need to build in, and you can really change the thinking coming through. Sustainability at its core is about doing more with less, and so you need to kind of talk to them about different ecosystem, different requirements, not buying the same way that they always used to from the same suppliers. They need to be worked through. And then finance is a group. You need to be able to bring in the cost savings. You need to be able to show here that you've got aspects, but like with legal and risk, resilience starts coming in. And we've got so many examples now where if you're not, the geopolitical changes that are coming through, and there is real risk that comes in to not just your license to operate, but getting the products and services you need. So you should be thinking more potentially buying locally and stop trying to buy further afield that might have a lower cost, but it's a more vulnerable supply chain. And so you kind of need to think through a lot of different aspects really before you even get to the suppliers, right? And then within these, you need to be thinking, or is there a policy change I need to make, and how do I enforce that? What are some of the standards that we can all agree on? The procedures, the tools and guidance that you give all the different stakeholder groups that you need to agree, and then the KPIs. And so I think whether you can bring a governance structure together that meets on a regular basis, that is these different groups or areas, is going to be more beneficial than procurement trying to do it by themselves, or sustainability trying to do it by themselves. And then that's really where you get the momentum and are able to really make the change that you need to all the different aspects. And so that's where, for me at CBRE, I was building it into the processes, the procedures, the technology roadmap, the policies, and quietly just building into these and having regular discussions with sustainability. But actually, initially, I didn't need anything from sustainability because it was all procurement. We were the ones that needed to come up with these things and knew what we needed. We were the ones that needed to get the data from the suppliers. We were the ones that needed to engage with the suppliers. And so sustainability provided that moral and kind of high level support, but it's really procurement that owned all of this. But then they would help with the other business owners and finance and legal and suppliers as well. So when you also think about this area, there's a lot that can be done that doesn't involve additional costs. And it can, as I said, be built through your roadmap as a procurement person. Everyone wants better data. I mean, it helps on this better spend analytics, then helps on better sourcing and better tracking of benefits. So we can kind of bring all these different aspects into it. And it depends a little bit on, interestingly, where you are in the world. Like in the US now, resilience is a key aspect that we talk about in sustainable procurement because ESG has been weaponized, basically. In Europe, you still talk about sustainability as a key aspect. In Asia, I think you still think about the three ESG aspects. In Australia, it's a bit of a mix of Europe and Asia, with I think the US though focusing on resilience is a key aspect. And it's just there's a lot of examples more recently that kind of come in. There used to be about every 10 years, there'd be some climate event that would really impact the supply chain, like in Thailand and then in Japan with the tsunami and things. But now it's happening much more often. So when you're building your business case for this, you need to think of what the hooks are depending on the stakeholder groups that went through earlier and what the organization is focusing on. And so you can then look to start, if it's a bit more banking or government, you want your supply chain to be better run. And so suppliers that or companies that are more sustainable, have more processes, procedures, lower risk because they have more reporting and they understand their business more. And so better run companies might be better or should be more sustainable, but they're also, that lower risk and they're more resilient. That kind of comes in. You might want more data coming in, so that you can add to your data lake and that you can better manage your supply chain and try and get to your tier 2 or 3 into your supply chain and look at some of those, which often is where the emissions are, especially if you're a service company buying services. The emissions generally not with your tier 1 or first level of suppliers. It's further down. There is a huge amount of efficiency and waste, and that we know. I mean, when I worked at Citibank, we saved $2 million in 1 year by just playing around with the electricity in a couple of buildings and a data center. We knew that it was there. And so that high carbon then generally will mean high energy use, which will mean that there's cost savings and waste reduction and efficiencies that can be identified. So look at carbon as also a way in your supply chain or value chain to identify opportunities for savings. Innovation is a great one. It doesn't always work. I ran a hackathon a couple of years ago that was a complete failure. I'd brought in CBRE clients and CBRE and suppliers and manufacturers. We looked at how do we decarbonize HVAC or like the air in buildings. Too broad. And so it just kept coming back to, well, the government needs to do something. I'm like, well, no, we can do something. So innovation hackathons, I think, are great. You need to be totally focused on a small area that you want to look to improve, and then have it across the value chain, bring in these different groups. But what I did find worked really well at CBRE is when CBRE talked to the clients and the suppliers across those 3 tiers, then often the client requirements drove emissions through their supply chain, CBRE and CBRE supply chain, and with the supplier. And so if the client changed the requirements, ionized water on site versus the cleaning with chemicals, as an example, then that drove 20 to 30% cost reduction actually, and about 50% emissions reduction through the supply chain. But unless you're having those conversations across the tiers, you miss out. And really that starts building the trust at the customer level, the boards, investors, and regulators. It's just not greenwashing, that you're actually are really trying to make a difference in this and building their reputation for staff to come on board and get empowered and excited with what you're trying to do and start taking some ownership of this as well. But also, customers, and start talking about how better run companies are more sustainable and lower risk. It's a great sales aspect that is more important today than it's ever been.
The University of Queensland Advanced Diploma in Procurement and Contracting is accredited by the Australasian Procurement and Construction Council,
Yep.
and also has pathways into the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, the organisation that you generously speak at and offer to judge on various presentations as well. The Advanced Diploma is very interested in governance, and it's interested in influencing leadership. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about what is generally the CPO's opportunity to get a seat at the table. And it seems to me that it's not as frequent as many CPOs would like. And part of that might come down to some traditional reporting structures within an organisation. It might just be that the cadence of board meetings and committee meetings is such that procurement's never really been specifically included unless it's for a major project, in which case it'll be looked very much through the risk lens. Now, in terms of the opportunity for good news stories here, as we approach 30th of June, so our cut by customary practice in Australia, our main reporting period, what advice do you give to innovative and energetic CPOs in crafting messages to influence across the organization and the positive impressions of the organization to a broader audience who are reading the preface and the CEO's statements in terms of gains which have been made in terms of sustainability and circularity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as companies have reporting requirements, and Australia has that as well, with the Australian Sustainable Reporting, when it gets to scope 3, what they're going to find is that 80% of the emissions of most companies in scope 3, and that's either downstream in the use of products or upstream in your supply chain. So what CPOs and senior procurement leaders need to realize is this is coming to them, and so you should prepare. And the other aspect that you need to think about is that procurement is a cost center, and so it has always struggled to get budget to be able to do the things, the size of the team we want, the technology we need. That's all changing a lot with AI agents and procurement moving towards being more orchestrators of intelligence, like a number of other functions, so that we'll stop doing the doing. But the design of that and the requirements come in become a lot more important. So you're at a point in time where you're going to get this requirement to decarbonize your supply chains. The reporting requires it and governments require it. You've got the need to kind of change your team and invest in some different technology and upskill them. And you've got an opportunity like I did at CBRE, that this can become a differentiator to have a net zero supply chain product that helps sales team, i.e. revenue, increase. And so if your organization is focused on revenue, like most of them are, then that is what you can start hooking into. Or if it's a key risk aspect, then you can hook into those as well. But broaden it out and say, look, if I do this program, I need to bring in those some experts, and we need some technology changes, or I need some AI agents built, and then hook it to the revenue, to the risk, to the reporting requirements, to the reputation, to investors. There's a lot of hooks that you can look to use to kind of look to leverage in your organization. But yeah, and you've got a small amount of time. If scope 3 isn't hitting you already in Australia, if you're a reasonable size organization, it's going to soon. So you need to kind of get ready for it.
And I guess building on your comments in relation to revenue and risk, which is of interest, particularly to, well, revenue to commercial organisations, a risk to all organisations. I guess the extension into public sector context is to have a look at the reporting obligations that departments and agencies have in their respective jurisdictions. And for obviously state-owned corporations, government business enterprises and trading organisations, again, there'll be broadly similar reporting obligations, at least in their annual reports, to talk about developments in this area, either by mandate or either by discretion, that these are positive messages, and who doesn't need a increasing positive conversation to be able to have in times like these.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, there's and there is a lot of leading companies, lighthouse companies, that you're able to look to leverage and bring in the case studies and try things. So there's a lot of examples of stuff that's worked, even more examples of stuff that hasn't worked. And so drop it into your LLM, your preferred LLM, and ask it a few questions, and start seeing some of the case studies or books and things to read to be able to work through that program. But yeah, it's not like it used to be a couple of years ago, where you started a program like I did at CBRE and you're like, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Now it's like, yep, that works.
Yeah. And it sounds from what your earlier discussion was, and that wheel was very helpful. There's lots of different entry points in terms of influencing this and finding senior positions within organizations who may take notice. A CFO might be interested in one thing, a chief operating officer may be interested in something else. if
Yeah.
there's a chief marketing officer or head of sales, and they're always influential in commercial
Yeah.
organizations from my experience,
Yep.
then there's messages for them as well in terms of what their people can take out into the field to sort of sell their value proposition as well. Matt, we've mentioned in previous discussions with you the two books that you've written. Firstly, Sustainable Procurement and Action, written by yourself, and then Circular Procurement and Action, written with your colleague Helene Carpenter. Are there insights on the governance piece in either or both of those that are worthwhile for our students to dig into?
Yeah, really the sustainable procurement and action is talking, the first section is around the environment, um, and then looking at the social aspects and then the governance. So it really follows the ESG type of model. And it's really looking to be a practical guide to be able to pick up, read, try a few things, and then see what works in your organization. Lots of case studies, lots of examples. It leverages a lot around the Sustainable Procurement Pledge and the Scope Through Peer Group, and other best practice organizations, which I'd recommend sort of engaging with those as well. They're focusing a lot more on peer-to-peer support. It's not trying to sell you anything. And there's a lot of people out there who are trying in this space and have been successful and are open and willing to share. So yeah, don't feel that you're alone trying to do it as a lone star in your organization. There's a lot of help that can come along.
Fantastic. That's a nice place to conclude our discussion. This was one of three conversations with you, Matt. Really appreciate your time, great insights, and encourage every one of our students or anybody watching this recording more broadly to have a look at the two books that you've written. They're very much on topic. They're providing practical advice and guidance, which I think is still continues to be, even given all the development of the discussions in the literature. I think it's the practical and the application, which for many people still seems to be the challenge. So thank you so much for joining us in these conversations and your contribution to the field as well.